do this thing.
We're good.
Cool.
Joel, it's you.
Okay. Well, I just want to welcome everybody. I'm Joel Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP. And our association is a C3 nonpartisan organization that represents Head Start and ECAP providers, staff, parents, and of course, advocates for the children that are enrolled in the program. We have been hosting a number of candidate forums, and these candidate forums are very specific to families with young children. And tonight, we're very fortunate to have a candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Marko Liias. He is a state senator currently. And we're honored to have you join us. The format is that we have a set series of questions, and then if we have some time at the end, we'll open it up for attendees. So we really appreciate you joining us. And to get us started, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and maybe share a little bit about why you're interested in joining us at this specific forum around children and families. And thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Marko Liias, a lifelong Washingtonian, a state senator, and a college professor running to be our next lieutenant governor. You know, I don't have to tell any of you about the challenges that we are facing in this moment. I think we are all witnessing history every day. And I think that this moment really calls for bold transformational changes in our state. And I believe that I bring unique qualifications to help make that change. You know, the primary role of our lieutenant governor is serving as our Senate president. And it's no mistake that I'm the only senator who's running. And I believe that that gives me the qualifications, but also my leadership as our Senate Majority Floor Leader, making change in the Senate shows why I'm most qualified for this role. And you don't have to take my word for it. Our current Lieutenant Governor, Cyrus Habib, has endorsed me, calling me the most qualified for the role. Over the last 12 years, I have a proven bipartisan and progressive record delivering change on critical issues for Washingtonians, and particularly when we think about Washingtonians with children, Washingtonians who are imagining themselves as parents. We've got to create a better state with more supports. It's why I was so intent on getting the most progressive paid family and medical leave program in the nation on the books, because when we provide good paid leave, that's the first step to building that really strong bond between a new parent and their new child. And the data is so clear, especially for the mother-to-child relationship, so critical, not just for the little baby either. We know that having that time and having that connection is critical to postpartum health for mom and for babies. So it's why I was so proud to help deliver that. And we did it in a bipartisan way. We had Democrats and Republicans, the business community and labor organizers, all at the table crafting a plan that is the best in the country. But we have more challenges to go. We have to make sure that our education pathways are there for everyone. And in 2020, to me, that means universal quality early learning from birth to kindergarten, and then strong public schools that help our students achieve their dreams, and then pathways into college and workforce training that also, by the way, should bring back the best and brightest back into early childhood education through those career pathways as well. And then the final thing is, you know, I think we all need to confront the equity and social justice challenges in our society. We are living in a state and in a country that do not have equitable outcomes for all Washingtonians, all Americans. We know that the opportunities available to our communities of color, to those experiencing poverty or housing instability, are not the same as to those of us who are white or in the middle class. And we've got to do more. And that's part of why I was so thrilled to see my friend Senator Wilson on this call. Claire and I are both part of a team inside the Senate Democratic Caucus right now developing equity tools that our budget writers, that our policymakers can use to evaluate policies. And as our next Lieutenant Governor, I want to embed those equity tools and equity lenses into the legislative process to ensure that all lawmakers are understanding the impacts of the decisions we're making, and that we are passing policies that correct historic disparities, not make them worse and double down on them. So those are a few of the priorities I wanted to highlight. I look forward to the dialogue and to the questions. This is just a wonderful group of folks. I appreciate all the advocacy of all the organizations involved with this. We all have a lot of work to do to make sure that Washington is a safe and nurturing place for all of our kids and for the future of our state.
Cool. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I'm now going to turn it over to Yuval, who will be our MC for this evening's forum. So thank you, Marko.
Yeah, thank you, Joel.
Thank you. So I will start off with our warm-up question, and then I will jump into explaining a little bit about the format of the questions after that. So our warm-up question for you today is, since our forum is focused on young children and families, what was your favorite children's book growing up and why?
You know, I think it really depends on the stage of my development. I will say, and I'm sure as someone that has a funny name, I'm sure you have heard the comparison to the Berenstain Bears. I hate to bring that up, but Berenstain Bears were one of my favorites when I was a little kid. I also remember the Boxcar Children was one that captured my imagination. And then the story that got me hooked on politics, my cousin in third grade gave me a biography of President Kennedy, and it just opened my mind to the opportunities of public service and to the incredible role that some of our nation's leaders have had in our history. And so reading was always fundamental. I just got an honorary lifetime membership to the Washington Library Association yesterday for some of my work on behalf of libraries, and reading and the journey that led me on has been really important to me in my life.
Thank you. And so moving forward, the questions are divided between some parents that are ready to ask them, and I will call upon them when it's their turn. And so first up, we have Brenda.
What is your definition of early learning?
I think early learning to me embraces from birth until a child arrives in kindergarten in our K through 12 systems. And obviously the experiences and the supports should be tailored in an age appropriate and developmental way. Pre-K, when we're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds, will look different than for our newborns. But I think what we know about the human brain from science is that it's a sponge that begins collecting information and experiences the moment we open our eyes on this planet. And so I think we should have an educational continuum that is nurturing and helping all of our kids to develop to their greatest potential from the very beginning.
Thank you. The lieutenant governor position is a unique role that does not always have a direct path or vision to affecting education policy. How do you envision being a champion for families and children as lieutenant governor?
That's a great question. And I think lieutenant governor is one of those roles that not everybody sees visible in the process. So it's good to just lay out some of the ways that it intersects with the legislative process, and I think some of the leadership opportunities. The first I'll say is that the lieutenant governor chairs the Senate Rules Committee, which is the gatekeeping committee that all legislation that moves to the Senate has to proceed through to get considered by the Senate. So there is a formal step in the process where I would use that position to advance bills that expand equity and access to education. And that means from early learning to K-12 to our higher ed system. The lieutenant governor also presides over debates in the state Senate, and in that role has to, at some points in time, rule on parliamentary procedural questions. Also is called upon to just cast a tie-breaking vote at times. And we see on issues of, for example, progressive tax reform, having a progressive lieutenant governor ready to cast a tie-breaking vote to build a better tax code for our state is critically important. The other kind of larger set of responsibilities, the lieutenant governor chairs a number of outside committees or joint committees of legislature. One is the Legislative Committee on Economic Development and International Relations. And I think providing access to affordable quality childcare is an economic development issue for our state. It is holding back employers and workers alike because we don't have access to affordable quality care. And in order for us to be competitive on a global landscape where our competitors in Europe all have quality early learning programs and childcare systems in place, we need to compete for our workers and for our companies here as well. And then the final place is Teddy Roosevelt talked about the bully pulpit, the ability of public officials to influence the debate and the discussion based on their values and their vision. And that's a place where, as majority floor leader, I have exercise that by helping push my colleagues to take on bold progressive policies and make change. It wasn't my name on the bill, and it wasn't me that led the coalition, but I have a demonstrated ability to lead and to bring people together. I would do that as Lieutenant Governor. And the fact that 3/4 of our Senate Democrats have endorsed me tells you the folks who know this role best, have seen me in action, believe that I'm the person that can help lead us forward.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Carolyn.
Good evening. ECAP is a high-quality, comprehensive early learning program that serves some of the most at-risk families. Research shows that investments in programs like ECAP pay off particularly for disadvantaged children and families. Do you support increasing ECAP funding? Why or why not?
Absolutely. I've been very supportive. We have a great Mukilteo ECAP program that comes and visits me during session each year, and those moms are some of my favorite visitors because of the hope and opportunity that they represent. What I love about the ECAP model is the way that it integrates parents into the learning process and gives everybody a seat at the table to ensure that kids have a safe place to grow and learn, but also that parents get help with the skill building and support that they need along the way too. So I have been proud to support expansions of ECAP over time. We need to do more, and that's why I'm particularly thrilled again to cite my friend Senator Claire Wilson, who's been leading our Senate Democratic Caucus in a discussion around how do we expand access to ECAP, create more slots, more availability. We also have to talk about the physical spaces that these programs inhabit too. Our Mukilteo ECAP program was at an elementary school, but then the school district had to repurpose that for their needs. And now they're in what is kind of like an industrial park. And our kids deserve safe and child-specific facilities. So I think in addition to expanding slots, we also need to ensure that we're providing the best physical space for our kids to learn in and to grow in and to be safe in.
Thank you. April will be asking our next question.
Wake up, April.
Oh, great. I didn't realize I was up. Child care providers are often the lowest paid employees in a lot of industries, sometimes making less than dog walkers and parking lot attendants. What is your plan for affordable and accessible childcare for families while increasing rates for those providers?
Yeah, it is definitely a poor reflection on our values as a state and as a society that we've allowed that to happen. It's part of why I'm proud that we've raised the minimum wage in this state, because we know that that pushes all wages up, and we've seen evidence to show that that's taking place. And why I was proud to support the governor and the Department of Labor and Industries in enacting new overtime rules to also help ensure that all workers are getting access to overtime compensation regardless of their income. So I think those are two steps we've taken that will help. What we need is more resources, candidly, to invest in this. As we expand slots, we've also got to fund a career ladder that goes along with that to ensure that our workers are being taken care of. And again, in the work that Senator Wilson and our early learning team is doing, they're not just thinking about the kids and the education, but also about the workers and the teams that we need to develop that. It's also why I've supported more access to tuition-free college, so that we can make sure that our next generation of early learning educators is able to get their training without going deep into student debt like my generation was stuck with. So I think across the board, we can do more, raise wages, ensure that folks get access to overtime, make higher education and training affordable or free ideally, so people can get into the profession more easily. And then remember that it's not just about the kids, but it's about the workers that'll deliver that. And I think it will need to be phased, just like this whole expansion will need to be phased, but we've got to make sure we're lifting our educators up at the same time that we're expanding access to our kids and families.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Jessica.
Hi. Only about 5% of eligible families receive home visiting from federal, state, and local funds. What are your plans to support pregnant moms and families with newborn children? Are you going to work towards expanding policies around paid family leave? early ECAP and home visiting?
Yes, that's a great question, Jessica. My family, my parents immigrated from Finland, and so I still have relatives in Finland where they have a much more robust set of supports for expectant moms and for new parents as well. In fact, I've led efforts to try and get us to pilot baby boxes like they send in Finland to new families to make sure everybody has the resources they need. We need to expand access to home visiting, and one concrete thing that I have worked on and I think can help in this regard is to connect those who are receiving our paid family and medical leave program with the resources that already exist. And so we want to create a connection between the paid family and medical leave program and, for example, the Help Me Grow hotline and referral network, so that we can identify, because we know what benefits we're paying out in paid family and leave, who qualifies on income levels for some of those supports. So we can, along with sending them their paid family leave checks, send them a referral to some of those services. The system's still coming online, so that connection isn't completely there yet, but I think there are some efficiencies there. And then I was strongly supportive of the governor and Senator Wellman's proposal to ensure access to home visiting for all families in Washington. That should absolutely be our vision. We know, again, that it's a penny of investment with dollars and dollars of reward, because both mom and baby have better health outcomes, and also we can address some of the developmental and skills-based supports that some of our families need, and also address the other challenges of housing instability or food instability or access to jobs and training through that contact and through that work. So I strongly support making that investment. I know, again, that as our team in the Senate Democratic Caucus is looking at it, that home visiting is a part of this approach, and it needs to be one of the tools we're using to help families succeed and thrive.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Brenda.
Brenda, you're muted.
Brenda, you're on mute.
Oops, my bad. Thank you. Prior to COVID-19, 1 in 11 children were homeless. Due to the pandemic, we have seen an increase in homeless children and families. What will you do to ensure children have safe and stable housing?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things we need to do. We need more crisis placements so that families in crisis have housing that they can get to immediately. We also, for youth experiencing homelessness that aren't in their family setting, need to invest both in more family reunification efforts where that's appropriate, and in culturally relevant and supportive foster placements. I'm really proud of the work that Secretary Hunter and the team are doing at DCYF to ensure, particularly for our LGBTQ youth, that foster placements are safe and affirming of all of our youth in this state. So we need to provide more support there. We also need to look on the housing side of the ledger as well, and build more housing near schools so that families can be closer to their educational opportunities. Really excited the Everett Public Schools up in my county has a plan in conjunction with a local nonprofit housing developer to put family units right next to an elementary school in communities where we see families experiencing housing instability. I think that's one concrete investment we need to make. We also need to look at stronger landlord-tenant protections. In our state, you're allowed to evict someone with no cause whatsoever, and we know that eviction pushes too many families into housing instability, and we should have a just cause eviction rule. You should have some reason why you're evicting people. That'll also help with equity concerns. We know that there are folks who are being evicted because of their racial or gender or sexual orientation or identity, and moving to a just cause rule would get that out of the way, would make that not possible. We also need to look at rent control like California and Oregon have done to keep the costs of rent from skyrocketing and pushing people into housing instability as well. So we need to build more housing, have more support services to families that are in crisis, whether that's through reunification or through our foster care system. We need to build more public housing near schools, and then think about the landlord tenant protections that would help some families from getting pushed into housing instability to begin with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Carolyn.
What will you do to ensure every child has access to the best available medical, mental health, and dental care?
Well, I'm really proud that in the last recession, when others suggested cutting Apple Care or limiting enrollment, that I was one of those that fought back and made sure that Apple Care for all kids remained a universal program, even in the last most difficult recession. So we build from a strong foundation. I do think we need to examine the equity challenges in our healthcare structure. We know that for families in rural areas, they don't have physical access to healthcare in the way that families in urban areas might. We know that the intersectionalities of poverty and race and ethnicity lead to disproportionate numbers of folks from our communities of color not having access to quality healthcare for their kids. We need to solve some of those challenges, and we need to look at how we can use telehealth and technology to also bridge part of that gap, so that families don't have to take a day off from work to go get their kids seen, if that's something that could be done via telehealth. And we passed new laws in the last year or two that really put telehealth on equal footing with that physical visits. It helps us now in the pandemic, but as we move out of the pandemic, I'd like to see us using telehealth more to enable those connections. And then the final thing is we've got to make sure that parents and grandparents have access to healthcare as well. Apple Care is a good start, but I support a universal single payer health system to make sure that every single Washingtonian has access to healthcare. We know that this is one of the leading causes of disproportionate outcomes for people of color, a lack of access to quality care. In this pandemic, we see the data that our Black and Brown and Indigenous Washingtonians are more likely to get COVID-19, and the fatality rates are higher for them because we don't have an equitable healthcare system. So we've got to really focus in on taking care of our kids, but also make sure that their parents and caregivers have access to healthcare through a universal model. And we have to be innovative and equitable in making sure that it gets to everyone.
Thank you. April?
I heard you say that a penny invested is $1 on the other end. With that being said, early learning is only about 1% of Washington's state budget. In your opinion, is the state of Washington investing sufficiently in early childhood?
No. I believe that we should both tackle two challenges. One, that we have the most upside down tax system in the country, where folks at the bottom of our economy pay 15 cents on the dollar in state and local taxes, and Bill Gates pays about a penny. We've got to turn that right side up. And the resources that we raise through progressive tax reform, from things like a capital gains excise tax or adjusting our state's estate tax to make sure that the folks that got a tax break from Donald Trump are contributing to state government, should be invested first in early learning. I think we've done incredible work in K through 12 in response to the Supreme Court. We've made significant investments in higher ed. In this current budget, it's time to get serious about early learning. And again, ECAP, Head Start, also working connections and some of the other opportunities we have, make sure that we're growing programs in a phased way. I wish we could wave the wand and get to universal quality opportunities for everybody immediately, but we know that it'll take time to build the infrastructure and hire the workers and get everybody into the system. But we need to start that path now. It's why the team that's working in our Senate Democratic Caucus is so critical. And I'm really proud that this commitment goes all the way to the top. Senator Billig, our majority leader, is personally helping lead these efforts with Senator Wilson. Our Senate Democratic team takes this seriously. We want to see substantial and transformative investments in this space. I'm excited to work as Lieutenant Governor to make sure we can get it done.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. We are going to move into our last question before we open it up for Q&A. And so Joel will be asking our last question for the evening.
Well, thank you. So Marko, I want to follow up on the question around progressive taxation, and just kind of get your sense as you think about what we're facing, a pretty significant budget deficit. How do you think the state should close that deficit? I mean, you touched on that in terms of progressive taxes. Which progressive taxes? What are there things that you would support cutting? Do you think things that we can make some more investments in? Kind of walk us through your values and how you think about dealing with the budget deficit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to lead with an equity lens in these decisions that we're making. It's part of why I'm proud to be on that team that's developing concrete equity tools we can use as we evaluate budget decisions and revenue decisions and understand who's being impacted and is it disproportionate or not as we're making these choices. In the last recession, 97% of, or 93% of the budget gap was closed by something other than new progressive revenue, mostly cuts, and we need to do better than 7% new revenue. It should be evenly matched. We're fortunate that we've got a healthy rainy day reserve right now, so I believe we should use our reserves to meet this moment and protect core services, and I believe that we should raise new progressive revenue. Those should be the first two things we do, and then look at cuts or efficiencies as a final step if we can't get there through revenue and through reserves. In terms of revenue, I've mentioned the capital gains excise tax. I also think other mechanisms like a high earner payroll tax or high earner income tax make sense, and looking at existing tax preferences and tax loopholes, and asking ourselves, is this loophole worth more than providing more education, more opportunity to our kids and families? I believe that with reserves and with new revenue, we can close most of that gap, the large measure of that gap. We also expect that Congress, especially if we can get a new administration in Washington, will send us relief and assistance as well. The House of Representatives, for example, if the package they passed at the over the summer had passed into law, Washington would have received probably around $5 billion on a per capita basis. That would really help us close these gaps. The final thing I'll say is I think we need to apply a progressive lens to any cuts as well. And that one area where I do think there is room for significant reductions is in our mass incarceration policies. Washington State incarcerates 4 times the number of people per capita compared to our neighbors in British Columbia, and they have just as safe communities as we do. We incarcerate 10 times as many people per capita compared to Scandinavian and Nordic countries. So I think there's room to make efficiencies. We've got a 3 strikes law in the book that has taken a whole generation of largely people of color and put them in prison with life sentences for things that weren't always violent or dangerous crimes. And we need to revisit those policies and use an equity lens in determining how we allocate those resources as well.
Thank you. So now we are going to quickly open it up for those who are attending to ask a follow-up question to something that was said or something similar to that.
Hi, this is Jessica. I wanted to ask what you know or if you know anything about the MMIW movement. And it stands for Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Women.
Yes, thank you. The acronym I didn't catch, but yes, I have seen incredible activism from particularly Indigenous women in Central Washington who've stepped up, a lot of leaders in the Yakama Nation, but other tribal communities as well, demanding an accounting and justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women in our state. In the last budget, we invested more at the State Patrol to create a liaison position so that the State Patrol could help come alongside the Indigenous community and identify those cases that were overlooked or were poorly investigated in the past to see if we can achieve a measure of justice. Beyond that, I know that there are other things we can do and would want to hear from the affected communities around what we can do to lift this issue up and ensure that we're getting justice for people who unfortunately didn't receive it in the past.
Thank you.
Yuval, do you mind if I ask a question?
Please.
So, Marko, I'd like to know your thoughts on how do we make the schools more equitable, the K-12 system. What have you seen as a result of COVID-19, where there appears to be, at least from my perspective, some holes in the system? How would you fix those holes and maybe rethink how we do public education? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that while a lot of students have faced, a new educational opportunity or achievement gap in this moment because of lack of connectivity. There are places where students had devices and some of these techniques were already being used before, and those students, I think, are getting a good experience in this moment. So we can learn from what's worked and what hasn't to help bring up all students. I think one thing that's clear is we need universal access to broadband in Washington because too many of our families, in ways that again highlight existing disproportionalities, don't have access. And that's students in our rural communities, on our tribal reservations, and students of color even in the urban areas that don't have adequate access to broadband. So that is something we should be investing in. I also think we need to re-envision education and move from a seat time based model to a mastery based model. And I think this current moment is driving us to make some of those changes. How do we evaluate student progress if they're not sitting in a seat every day from this hour to this hour? These techniques we're developing now, these tools we're developing now, I think will help us into the future. And I think we also need to be more candid about making sure that all of our students are seen in the curriculum. I've been proud to support more statewide expectations around ethnic studies so that all of our students and the cultural diversity that exists in our state is reflected in our curriculum. We also need to do a better job of recruiting and retaining staff and faculty of color in our K-12 schools. We still have overwhelmingly white teacher corps teaching a very diverse group of students. We need to really tease out the ways. And one of the ways we can do that is by helping our very talented paraeducators of color get teaching certificates and getting the education in a cost-effective way to come back to the schools and communities they were in as teachers. That's one step that I know has been worked on. Beyond that, I think there's a myriad of other steps that need to be taken in terms of looking at funding and how it's being allocated to ensure that we're tearing down kind of historic disproportionalities and disparities. That's why that racial equity lens is going to be critical in the budget and the policymaking process. Because as a lawmaker who doesn't currently sit on the K-12 committee, I don't always know what are the things that are driving inequity. And I think an equity lens, an equity tool that's applied to education policy would help us identify what are those hidden structures of racism that are leading to disproportionate and racialized outcomes, and how can we tear them down. Again, our team on the K-12 committee, Senator Wellman, with her able vice chair, Senator Wilson, they are zeroed in on this equity struggle, this equity challenge, and I want to work in allyship with them to bring forward the measures it's going to take to lead to better outcomes.
Thank you. And looking at the time, we are a little bit over time now, and so I will invite Joel to say some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Yuval. Well, I wanted to just thank you, Marko, for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to just leave our audience with? Of course, when this candidate form is done, we've recorded it, so we'll provide a copy for you, and you can use it with your campaign. But we'll also share it on social media and with our members. But is there anything you'd like to just leave us with?
You know, I think we are at a critical moment in our state's trajectory. And I think about all the opportunities that I've had in my life. I was the first in my family to go to college, and you know, my parents are regular middle-class folks. My dad's a carpenter, my mom was a school lunch lady. And I wonder, and I really struggle with the question of whether students in my family's position have access to the same opportunities now that I had a generation ago. And I don't think we're doing enough. So this is a moment when we can address some of these historic inequities, these historic challenges with big, bold solutions. And I'm excited for that work. It's what I've been doing for the last 12 years. And it's what motivates me to take this step up. We've got big challenges. We've also got big solutions. And let's get to work and get it done and create a fair and equitable future for every kid and every family in our state.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.